The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 72, recorded on Friday, August 26th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we discuss the Citizens United ruling and how it has been impacting campaigns over a decade later. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
First up in headlines.
Jason! We've got good news.
That does not belong on this podcast.
No, it does. We are the progressive optimists, and we deserve to have good news because that's why. We've waited long enough, and we should have some good news. Are you ready for the good news?
I am ready.
All right.
It better not be anything about Jesus.
It is one. Well, I mean, I could have some stuff about Jesus if you wanted.
Have you heard the good news?
Like many of you probably have heard, Biden has recently announced a student loan debt relief plan for borrowers making less than $125,000. All I can say is, holy crap, finally.
Yeah, it's about time.
Oh my God.
This is a campaign promise that Biden himself 100% had control over.
We were waiting for a very long time.
Yeah, and it took 2 years to finally get this done.
Well, and we talked about this before, where the reason why he was doing it is because he was trying to get it done through Congress very stupidly first.
Yeah, which he should have known would never happen.
Right. So then eventually he has done it through the executive orders as well as the Department of Education policy. So, hooray!
Yes, and as many will say, it doesn't really go far enough. Other candidates were proposing relieving $50,000 of debt. Obviously, there are others that said, why don't we just cancel all federal student loan debt? Because why should you go into debt for trying to get an education? That seems rather bizarre.
Well, and we talked about it in our student debt relief episode.
Yes, we have an entire episode about it that you can go to if you want to know like our specific thoughts and how we felt about this topic. This was an early topic.
Well, this was back during the Dem primaries, I think it was, yeah. And so I was pretty happy to find out that, I mean, we were expecting the $10,000 of relief. Sounds great. I was not expecting the up to $20,000 for Pell Grants.
Right, and Pell Grants generally go to lower income households, and that they do represent quite a lot of the federal student loan debt. As you might imagine, you're lower income, you'll have less ability to pay back the loans once you graduate.
So, and then there's a bunch of other stuff for reform in here as well, requiring borrowers to pay no more than 5% of their discretionary income monthly on undergraduate loans. That's pretty dang good. Raise the amount of income that is considered non-discretionary income and therefore is protected from repayment. Forgive loan balances after 10 years of payment instead of 20 years.
Right.
That's very, very good. And then cover the borrower's unpaid monthly interest. Yeah.
That all sounds terrible, Joe. Why come? I did not get anything in this. I never went to college. I don't get anything. But now I'm going to have to pay somebody else's loans?
Well, so then let's get into the criticisms. So we already kind of talked about how it's not going far enough from progressives. And that's very, very true. I would recommend that, at least for me personally, student loan forgiveness is kind of like a mere band-aid on a gushing wound that we have the student loan crisis to be with. However, it's something, right? At least it's doing something with what we have right now. I would also argue that more impactful things like even $50,000 or even just forgiving all student loans would have greater backlash or may require some kind of legislation for it. So given the political context, fine.
We'll see if this even holds up.
Right, exactly.
Because I'm sure it's going to get challenged.
Oh, 100% it's going to get challenged.
And with our Supreme Court, and doing anything beyond loan forgiveness, like trying to fix predatory loan structures or the high cost of education as it is now, is going to require something more than executive action. It is going to require Congress. So,
as annoying as that
progressives complaining or liberals complaining that they want those things, like this doesn't fix the root of the problem.
You're right.
Yeah, that's
You're
true.
right.
But that's not something that could have been accomplished as easily as this was.
Correct. But I want to talk about the absolute Republican and conservative freakout that's happening right now. So you already kind of mentioned it, but you have so many conservative Republicans saying, why do I have to pay for some person to get a gender studies degree because they're too stupid to pay back their student loans?
They're the ones who took out the loans. Why don't they pay it back?
Well, so I'm seeing some differences in criticism from the right. There's obviously the most is that, where it's
Personal
it's the fairness
responsibility.
thing. Yeah. And, well, you saw my post about it on Facebook that got a lot of weird traction I was not ready for, where I described that what's interesting about these types of things is that when you see these criticisms, they will go out of their way to defame the character of the people who are benefiting from this. I will technically benefit from it. Lots of my friends will be technically benefiting from it. They work full time, they pay taxes, they sound like upstanding citizens. But when they're described by these people who are criticizing the program, it's always they're lazy, entitled, stupid, they made poor life decisions, whatever they can to discredit the person themselves. And what I wrote in my post on Facebook was about there was actually a psychological understanding behind that, where in America, we hate people who are supposedly getting unfair treatment from us. I mean, like, hate it to the point where we are willing to burn everything to the ground to make sure that someone doesn't get better treatment than we do.
We talked about it briefly last week.
We did. So that's what's going on here, where you see, and again, I just find it absolutely fascinating, almost like a huge ego problem with a lot of these people, where they feel so threatened by the notion of education and educated people around them, or people who are supposedly more educated than they are, that they are willing to tear down the character of people that they have no clue who they are just to feel better about themselves.
There is one baffling aspect where you hear, well, this is just a wealth transfer from the lowest income people to middle and upper middle class, because they're the only ones that go to college and take out loans, Joe. No one from the lower classes goes to college, as we all know. All of this debt is accrued by people who could easily pay it back. They just don't do it because they don't want to.
You know, that's kind of the big thing with talking about black and brown communities as well, because as opposed to white students, black and brown students tend to rely on student aid far more than the white counterparts do. So you actually have much more of an incentive if you want to help systemic racial equality issues.
Right, it comes from that wealth gap that we were talking about.
Exactly.
So yes, the idea that this is primarily for people that are already better off is just not true. One of the quickest ways to change your class status in America, one of the only reliable ways, is to use education. And higher education has gotten so expensive that you end up in crippling debt, which just makes it harder to change your class.
Well, and on that as well, I've been cited the wage gap between the educated, or not the educated, uneducated, but the bachelor's degree havers versus high school diploma havers. And it's usually around a $25,000 to $30,000 difference in wage. That's a pretty significant portion, and it's growing, by the way. Now, they use that as a way of saying, okay, so it's unfair to all of those people who have high school diplomas, and you're giving relief to wealthier people. But in actuality, you're conflating two separate issues here, because the reason why the wage gap persists the way it does is because we devalue the positions that high school diploma holders actually have. That's the problem, where we have very basic, mundane jobs that are paying between, $14 to $17 an hour, and they require a bachelor's degree.
Right. Comes back to the issue of low wages, stagnated wages, while the upper positions in the company, their profits are increasing and their wages increase at exponential levels. Meanwhile, the average worker does not get any increase, or even their average wage goes down over time.
The other criticism I'm seeing a decent amount of is, why are we using it on student debt? Why aren't we doing medical or auto debt, things like that? And a lot of it comes down to how the debt works. So we actually talked about this in our student loan forgiveness episode way back when, but unlike other types of debt, student loan debt is primarily, I think it's like 92 to 94% owned by the US government. That is not said about medical or auto or any other kind of debt there is. So it is much easier to forgive debt that's already owed to the federal government because they're the ones forgiving it, as opposed to trying to work out some kind of stimulus with banks or hospitals or any medical providers that would be needed to fix other kind of debt relief packages.
Correct. And there is an unfortunate group of people in this that have turned to private debt consolidation companies in order to lower their student loan payments.
And now they're not eligible.
And now because that got moved from a federal loan to a private loan, that is not covered in this, nor can it be by executive order because Biden doesn't have the power to do that.
Right. So that really sucks, legitimately.
And is still a problem.
Yes. And the last one that I cannot stand, and this is from both the Republicans and nonsense centrists, or whatever third party people you want to talk about, is this is just a political ploy or a political stunt want to get votes. He doesn't care about anything other than trying to buy votes from people.
Yep, as is everything else.
And that's exactly my point. This is a policy. If anything, like we just talked about, he campaigned on this policy. So if anything, we are actually getting the return on our investment for a change, right? We don't usually get to see that happening in our politicians because usually the return on investment, or when you hear about people talking about ROI in politics, it's usually high-end corporations who are spending millions and millions of dollars who are trying to fundraise for these candidates, who are trying to give them some kind of tax breaks or whatever, right? So for once, the working people actually had a return on their investment for a policy that they already planned on voting for when they voted for Joe Biden. With that said, every single thing in politics is about staying in power or getting at power, basically. That's all it is. So every policy, every type of statement they make, whatever it is, it's all about trying to get or stay elected. So the fact that some random policy is just a political stunt for votes makes it no different than any other policy that any other president or legislator has ever proposed in their entire career or the history of the United States. And that drives me nuts, Jason.
Right. If you look at what are the signature bills passed by the last couple presidents, Barack Obama had the Affordable Care Act designed to lower healthcare costs and make healthcare affordable for average people.
Buying votes.
Apparently. Donald Trump greatly reduced taxes on the rich and corporations.
Not buying votes. That's a good policy.
That's just responsible government right there. It created like a $4 trillion deficit.
Yep.
Whatever. And Joe Biden, so far, we have the inflation reduction, whatever, basically green energy bill and student loan forgiveness. That politician son of a bitch.
Right. So to me, like, this last criticism just displays absolute ignorance of what politics and governance actually is. And I think it's just because they want to hate politicians so bad that they'll think of any reason to not like them. With that said, if you want to talk political strategy, and we actually were talking about this prior to starting recording, we can talk about the timing. Should he have done it sooner, or was he waiting? I actually don't know, because we talked about how he was trying to get this done from the get-go, but he was running into obstacles left and right because of Congress.
Even though everyone told them just release an executive order.
Right, exactly. So I actually don't know how much of this was intentionally waiting versus he was actually just like, all right, well, we got to do it before the midterm, so let's do it now. With that said, I think this was one of the best political decisions he could have possibly made, because within a day, Jason, within a day, the entire conversation around politics went from inflation, immigration, how bad anything in the economy was going, whatever it is, to I hate students in colleges. That's literally what the entire discourse is about right now. And when it comes to elections, issue saliency, or what's on people's minds at the time of the election, matters a lot. For the last, I think it was like 6 to 7 months, it was always inflation.
And gas prices.
And now people don't see that it's that important anymore, especially now when you're seeing with the Dobbs decision, with FBI raids on Donald Trump, which we'll talk about in a little bit, with the January 6th hearings, with the January 6th insurrection.
With gas prices going down. With some of the goods prices going down.
And now we have this on top of it, where you're seeing Democrats actually delivering on some of the promises that they were promising to people. And that's a good thing. That's just legitimately a good thing, because now the direction has shifted into Democrats' favor. And apparently it's kind of working too. Now, granted, this was actually before all this news announced, but there were special elections that were happening in New York at the time, where I think swing/lean Republican districts are actually going blue in special elections, which now pollsters are saying is a great sign for Democrats, because they're saying that the Republican messaging is not sticking. In a year that Democrats are supposed to get their butt kicked, Democrats are actually coming back and winning seats.
And Mitch McConnell himself recently indicated that he believes the Democrats will keep the Senate.
I can't believe it, Jason, but Democrats are in array.
I think you used that a couple weeks ago.
Shut up. Let me have this moment. Up next, away from the good news, we go to Texas, because of course we do.
Always bad news. At least more kids didn't get killed in school, so that's good.
Great. I'm very happy about that, at least. Texas schools are now required under state law to put up posters of the national motto, "In God We Trust." This is insane. And so you may have seen laws about this in other states before, and Texas said, let's do that. Hold my beer. I can do you one better. Where if any person or group donates a poster to the school, they are required now, not just encouraged, but now required by law to hang up in a conspicuous place for everyone to see.
Of course, now conservative groups groups are flooding schools with "In God We Trust" posters and signs.
So there were schools in other states that actually did things to try to get around these types of laws, where I think you had one school, what was it, in Kentucky or Kansas? I can't remember. But they were putting the back of like a dollar bill and framing that and putting it on a wall. Someone put a poster of like a penny.
Like a bar. They put up like the first dollar they ever made.
Yeah, basically.
In the classroom. Yeah, that's classy.
Oh, right. I mean, but it's better than a gigantic "In God We Trust" poster. So Texas said, well, we can't have that happen. That'd be too crazy. We gotta go further. So they actually put strict parameters on saying how big the text should be, where a flag should be underneath the text, and how like Texas flag should be in the corners or something like that. I don't remember what it was exactly, but to make sure that there no sneaky liberals are gonna undermine this law and make sure we have God in schools or whatever it is.
In other news, a sneaky liberal has gotten around the rules and given Texas schools "In God We Trust" sign with "In God We Trust" written in Arabic.
Because the law did not state
Yet.
it had to be in English. So now schools are actually getting lots of posters from this guy, I think in Florida.
I think it's the same guy who challenged the Bible.
I think it was. Yeah. He is sending them these posters in Arabic, providing with all the correct regulations that the law is requiring. And if the school has not received a poster before him, that's the big stipulation here, they are required by law to put it up. The sad part about it is you only have to put up one. So just because he sends them out doesn't mean they're going to be all over Texas schools, which makes
I'm
me very
sure they
sad.
were all conspicuously received after they had other ones.
I'm sure, because one guy versus a conservative army.
Right. And how are you ever going to prove it?
But it was still kind of funny.
Yeah.
So good job, you guy in Florida or whatever.
Florida man does good.
Florida man. Oh, no. That's not the stereotype. I don't like that at all. In other amazing news, the world is dying and language
Has no meaning.
has no meaning anymore. Jason, do you know what AP style is?
Yes, it's guidelines that they give to all of their writers to fit a specific way of writing that is considered proper for the AP, the Associated Press.
So AP Style Book, which apparently has a Twitter account, I was not aware of this, tweeted out this week, our style, don't use the pronoun she in reference to nations, ships, storms, or voice assistants, except in direct quotations. Use it instead. And conservatives lost their collective minds. My God.
How dare you not gender label a nation, a ship, or a voice assistant?
I'm just looking at some of these tweets again. The corporate left attack on females intensified through language.
Attack on females, especially with their very specific definitions for gender. What does that mean when talking about a ship?
Of course, Piers Morgan responded. My response? When did using the word she become so offensive, you virtual signaling clowns?
But yet, when you're talking about a trans woman,
Who the hell are you to tell me what I can and cannot say? She is a great word.
right? And Piers Morgan.
That's literally what someone said.
Piers Morgan, the well-known AP headline writer that this affects at all.
What is going on? You guys, no one knows how language works anymore. This is for news articles. What news article would you read that says, that chip, she's a fine beauty? You're gonna pop on freaking Wall Street Journal and talk about some voice assistant and said, yeah, she really had a good sexy voice. What is happening?
Right, or Ever Given, the ship that got stuck in the canal, it would be like, she has been stuck there for weeks or something. Like, no, that's dumb and confusing, and that would be why you would not want to write headlines that gender non-gendered things. But whatever, it doesn't matter. Anytime you talk about gender identity in this country, you can see the discourse. It is just poison and ridiculous, and you cannot use any common sense or any empathy for anyone. Conservatives are just insane.
Literally, I'm kind of sad. I can't find. I should have saved the tweet when I saw it, Jason. But there was so many tweets of saying I was in the Air Force for so many years. I was in the Navy or whatever. When we were on ships, we called ships she because out of respect to the ship herself. Don't you dare disrespect what we had for the love of our ship. What the hell are you saying?
I've got a boat, and you see it out in the yard when you come. I'm going to put those truck nuts on it, and then I'm still going to call it she.
I'm just losing my mind, man.
Yeah, this is the dumbest. This is Mr. Potato Head all over again.
Oh, no, I think this is so much worse because it doesn't even identify with, or
Neither does a hunk of plastic.
Well, that too, but this is so much worse because this isn't even about what like people trying to use anything or whatever it was. It was literally just, hey, in journalism,
guide.
we use this.
Yeah. In the AP, like it's the same thing. You can't say someone pled guilty. It has to be that they pleaded guilty. Like it's literally that type of, these are the guidelines when you write articles or headlines for the AP.
I don't give a rat's about the AP. As a lifelong sailor, I'll refer to boats as ships as she until I die.
Right. Well, they'll come for you.
The political correctness commissars can osculate my fundamental orifice.
The AP strike team is on its way.
What is going on?
You'll be put in a re-education camp.
Pound sand, AP. Get to the sea, why don't you? I'll include the tweet so you can just go and get really drunk looking at these tweets. Can't do it, man. Oh no, the world is crumbling around me and I see nothing but darkness and despair. And the language we use is but a fruitless effort to appease the stupid. I'm done.
We have a bit of breaking news to round out the headlines. Earlier today, a judge, the same judge who issued the search warrant for Mar-a-Lago, has unsealed a redacted version of the affidavit that was used to issue that search warrant. Pretty much what you'd expect. It is a good outline of the history of everything that was going on in the back and forth between Trump and his people and the National Archives when they were trying to retrieve the documents that were unlawfully taken and placed in Mar-a-Lago, which is not a secure location that they should be stored in.
So it's a golf resort, man. It's the most secure. It's basically like Fort Knox up in there.
It includes like the boxes of documents they got back initially and the fact that there were just randomly classified and top secret documents thrown in there.
Yep.
And they're like the just shock and appall that they had when they found that, and the fact that they went then right to the Department of Justice about it, and then a bunch of redacted pages, and then the 15 boxes of documents that were initially turned over when the criminal case or the investigation kind of began, and the fact that 14 of those 15 boxes were marked that they had confidential information in them, and they had some testimony from an FBI agent that specializes in document confidentiality and how the levels of secrecy in government documents go, and how he believed that these documents were improperly at Mar-a-Lago, or the premises, as it keeps saying in that affidavit, and that they believed that there were more documents that were not turned over, and then a bunch of more redacted pages that are blacked out, probably whoever the informant was at Mar-a-Lago basically confirming this information, or how they got it, whatever. We'll never know. It was redacted. And that's about it. And then it just talks about why they want the search warrant and what they expect to find and where they expect to find it, which is kind of the information that we already knew from the search warrant.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it's not a lot of information. Again, Trump was pushing for this because it makes it a better conspiracy, right? If you say, well, why haven't they released the
search warrant,
the affidavit?
Yeah.
What are they trying to hide? And he'll still continue that with as much as they redacted out of it. They'll say, what's all this redacted? It's trying to protect not only the person or however they're getting the information on the inside of Mar-a-Lago, but also there are other people that are targets of this investigation that is not publicly known, unlike Donald Trump, who himself voluntarily publicized or reported the search of Mar-a-Lago. There are other people that are involved that, there's been no indictments yet.
No.
So if there aren't any indictments, but yet they're named in this, that would lead to unnecessary public scrutiny of those individuals.
So, and I don't know if you saw this, Jason, but actually a couple days ago, I think it was on Monday, a former Trump lawyer was instructed to actually release a letter that was back from May working with the National Archives, saying that Trump had over 700 pages of classified documents, including special access program materials. And I don't know why he released it. I don't know why Trump thought it'd be a good idea, but now it's clearly out there saying that he has way way more confidential stuff and like really, really bad confidential stuff.
Right, this FBI document expert that's on here, one of the quotes from him is that the markings and the indications of what they were told is at Mar-a-Lago leads him to believe that with his expertise in this field,
Sure.
that they pertain to national defense intelligence.
Yeah, I actually literally listening to NPR. Their reporter even said that they were talking with a national defense expert as well, saying that whatever they have probably would set any single defense secretary's hair on fire.
And the fact that Trump is so close with the Saudis.
I know.
And the fact that they're giving, Jared Kushner $1 billion loan.
Yep.
It's so corrupt. It's the most corrupt administration in the history of the country. I can't even Nixon. Nixon pales in comparison.
I know, man.
To this. He's literally potentially selling national defense secrets to foreign countries.
To foreign adversaries.
Yeah, remember, where did all of the September 11th terrorists come from? Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, but those were the bad.
And who is he hosting golf tournaments at Mar-a-Lago with?
Those were
the same
good
people.
Those were the good Arabs.
Those are the ones that sell us oil, which is the only reason we put up with all of their.
It's kind of crazy, man. I actually still have no
people
idea.
will still vote for him. They'll still support him.
Of course they will.
They don't care. Whatever. He's a traitor. He should be executed for treason. That's fine.
I mean, it's not even that they don't care. It's
I like how he owns the libs, Joe. He owns them.
It's lit not because they don't care. It's because they don't know. Because you still have right-wing media spinning that's like crazy as in it's a left-wing witch hunt. And obviously Trump is doing a lot of that work himself, but they won't even know that this is actually happening.
He's a common man, just like you and me.
Oh, sure. But I would say even during like his impeachment hearings, like the second one was pretty black and white, but the first one, when it was at least a little bit more obscure.
The one that they still say today was just a witch hunt.
Yes. I still have to talk to conservatives and say, no, what he did was actually extremely bad and it was in black and white writing. I had to show him them the documents.
Was proven to be actually factually happened.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So you want to talk about the great state of our campaigns and elections then while we're talking about the potential of a Trump presidential run?
Well, yes. Let's talk about Trump now potentially having an undisclosed amount of money from sketchy sources.
We'll tell you how he got there.
Let's talk about how he could use that money to buy an election.
To the main segment.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
With the midterms fast approaching, we thought it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about campaigns and elections. And not just how campaigns and elections work and operate, but how they actually are funded, where they spend their money, where they get their money from, and how a decision over a decade ago impacts campaigns and elections today. Obviously, we're talking about the Citizens United decision.
Citizens United v. FEC, the Federal Elections Commission. This is, I'll say, even in the direct aftermath of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, I would still say Citizens United is the worst Supreme Court decision in my lifetime.
Yeah, I would have to say.
There's some others, obviously, going further back, but in my lifetime, this is the worst, the one that's most destructive to the country. So that's why we wanted to talk about it.
And clearly had repercussions since.
Yeah. So what is Citizens United? Citizens United is a 501c4 conservative political advocacy nonprofit founded in 1988. The impetus of this Supreme Court case started in 2004. In June of 2004, Citizens United petitioned the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, to stop ads for the Michael Moore movie Fahrenheit 9/11 from airing on the grounds that they violated election laws.
I actually didn't know that.
That's why we're doing this. The case was dismissed by the FEC in August of 2004, and this is after the election that was in question was already over with, which is always what kind of happens with these FEC rulings. They don't go that fast. They take months, so just keep that in mind going forward. And that was because the main allegations by Citizens United were purely speculation on what ads for the movie would look like once we entered the election-restricted time period of starting on July 31st. And this is due to the 2002 Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as was McCain-Feingold, which prohibited any corporation, nonprofit organization, or labor union from making an electioneering communication within 30 days of a primary or 60 days of a general election, or making any expenditure advocating the election or defeat of a candidate at any time.
Oh man, could you imagine if that was the case today? Oh boy.
So the movie Fahrenheit 9/11 opened on June 24th, and any ads for it had stopped well before that July 31st deadline where we entered that 60 days before the general election. And this was, it's a Michael Moore movie. It's very anti-George Bush. He obviously won the election over John Kerry anyway, so it really didn't have any impact on it. It's one of the highest grossing documentaries ever, though, so it did very well, but obviously did not influence the election.
You know what I was kind of intrigued about? I actually saw this movie in school. So, like, I was really confused about why we were watching it. To be complete, it was in our English class. And I think it was just because we had some free days or something like that. So all I can imagine is, like, maybe this was some liberal indoctrination that was actually going. I have no idea. So, but I actually saw this in school, weirdly enough. And I was just super confused about why we were watching a movie just bashing George W. Bush for 9/11 in our English class.
There was also a further ruling by the FEC in August of 2005, so a year after the initial ruling, that stated the film and the promotion of it represented a legitimate commercial activity, meaning this is what Michael Moore does. He's demonstrated a history of releasing these movies. These movies are done for profit.
Right.
He's not...
This isn't campaigning.
Right. He is not working directly for John Kerry. He's done this before. He's established this history of being a documentary filmmaker, and this was not done for electioneering purposes, essentially, is what they ruled.
That makes sense to me.
Now, this is kind of less well known. Citizens United started making movies. They created a rebuttal movie to Fahrenheit 9/11.
No, they didn't.
Titled Celsius 4111.
No, they did.
Which they state is the temperature at which the brain begins to die. That's about 105 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that doesn't seem
so
right.
I really don't think that's correct, but not much in this movie was factually correct.
Jason, we need to watch this movie, man.
If we can find it. It was completed in 6 weeks and was very supportive of George W. Bush and critical of John Kerry. It was much more of a naked electioneering movie than Fahrenheit 9/11 was. That obviously ran afoul of the FEC, and they ruled that paying to air it, because no one's going to air it willingly, because it was made in 6 weeks, and apparently due to the criticism that I read, looked like it was made in 6 weeks, that would constitute an illegal corporate campaign expenditure. Remember, corporations cannot, under McCain-Feingold, cannot advocate the election or defeat of a candidate at any time, which is what they're clearly doing with their movie.
So I found it for $3 on Amazon, and literally the cover of it is just the worst, like, word art you can ever imagine, with Michael Moore holding dynamite. Did you see the cover of this thing?
No,
I am
not.
going to put the cover of this thing in here so you can see the glory that it is this.
And it says the temperature at which the brain begins to die, which I don't think is...
All in lowercase, by the way. The truth behind the lies of Fahrenheit 9/11. No, my goodness. Oh.
There's a swastika. There's looks like Bush with a Hitler mustache, which I can get behind.
Oh.
Very nice.
Super high budget. Everyone's got to start from somewhere, even the propagandists, right?
Right. So far, Citizens United is just getting kicked around by the FEC. And that would continue, actually. Citizens United then produced another movie in 2007 titled Hillary the Movie. Very, as you can imagine, I didn't watch it, but it is a very anti-Hillary Clinton movie. This is before the primary that she had. Well, everyone expected her to walk away with the Democratic nomination, and she actually lost to Barack Obama. It was relatively unknown starting in this election cycle. He was only a one-term senator from Illinois. They had planned to release the movie on Comcast streaming or on demand right before the Democratic primaries in January of 2008. They tried to argue that the law was written that said, like, can't be a movie or on TV or on the radio. And they're like, oh, it's on demand. That wasn't mentioned because the law was written before.
Oh,
And they tried to argue that that did not go well, even in the Supreme Court. But this was specifically designed to create a lawsuit. They obviously, because they'd been through 2 of these cases previously, they knew they were violating election law. They did it on purpose. They planned to release it within that 1 month of the primary on purpose.
Yep.
There was no chance that any kind of ruling would be decided by the FEC before the primary election. Like I said, they take months to come to decisions. It's not a quick process. They knew that it didn't have any bearing on that primary election in 2008. That's not what they were going for. What changed between the Celsius 4111, which they did not challenge the ruling there, and this Hillary the movie? What changed within those 4 years between 2004 and 2008? Well, in 2006, Sandra Day O'Connor was replaced by Samuel Alito by George W. Bush, creating a 5-4 conservative majority in the Supreme Court.
And we need to talk. Okay, maybe we should do a deep dive on Samuel Alito for like another episode, because when we were talking so much about Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett, about how like bad they were as picks and how it used to be so much better. I mean, we even had, oh no, what was his name? Scalia, who like liberals and Dems hated with a burning passion. You need to understand that Alito was the Amy Coney Barrett of the early 2000s. Like, he was the beginning of sending, well, I guess technically Clarence Thomas was the beginning of sending unqualified people, but Alito was like the beginning of sending crazy unqualified evangelicals and super religious right-wing extremists.
To borrow their term, judicial activists.
Literally. Where, and I think if I remember correctly, it was all like very narrow vote. I think they won, or they nominated him or approved his nomination. It was like 53 to 47 or something like that. It was a very close vote in the Senate.
Back when you didn't just vote along party
no,
lines all the time.
back then it was literally like almost everybody was unanimously voted upon.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like the first big controversial Supreme Court nomination. And people are not talking enough about that. So I did.
And if you want to know more about Samuel Alito, look at some of the recent video that's come out of him giving speeches for conservative groups, laughing over how mad that the Dobbs ruling made the entire world and how much he doesn't care.
Yep.
So echoing the ruling from 2004, Citizens United was barred from airing Hillary the movie or any advertising for it by the FEC. They also lost their appeal in a DC appeals court, and the case was picked up by the Supreme Court in 2009. Then in January of 2010, along unfortunately predictably political lines, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of Citizens United.
Do you remember when this dropped itself?
Yes.
Do you remember the discourse of back in the day, even if you weren't paying too much attention to politics?
Yes. I mean, there are 2 main points everyone says, at least from the progressive liberal left side, is it made corporations people by giving corporations rights that are generally only granted to individuals.
Yep.
And that it said that money is speech.
That's what I remember from it, is that money was speech.
Mm-hmm. And conservatives will argue that that's not true, but let's look into it and see what the ruling actually did. It overturned earlier decisions, Austin v. Michigan State Chamber of Commerce, which allowed prohibitions on independent expenditures by corporations. The court also overruled a part of McConnell, Mitch McConnell, v. Federal Elections Commission, that held that corporations could be banned from making electioneering communications.
Ugh.
And to kind of give you background on what exactly in Austin it overturned, the court in Austin identified a compelling governmental interest in limiting political speech by corporations by preventing the corrosive and distorting effects of immense aggregations of wealth that are accumulated with the help of the corporate form and that have little or no correlation to the public's support or the corporation's political ideas. So basically saying corporations generate tons of wealth, they should not be able to then use that wealth
to influence elections.
Correct.
And now that's gone.
And in the Citizens United ruling, the court found that Austin's anti-distortion rationale interferes with the open marketplace of ideas.
Oh, I hate that.
Direct quote, protected by the First Amendment.
Gross.
All speakers, including individuals and the media, use money amassed from the economic marketplace to fund their speech, and the First Amendment protects that resulting speech. Again, providing those protections that are given to individuals to corporations. And again, another potential topic idea, these originalists, including Alito and Scalia, who was unfortunately still alive at this point, that are, sit up at night thinking about what George Washington would say and have like Ouija boards trying to communicate with Thomas Jefferson to figure out how they should rule. The idea originally for corporations is so completely different than what it is now. When America was founded, corporations were like cities and schools. They weren't for profit. And even when that started in the late 1700s, they would be charters granted by the government to like build railroads or bridges. And as soon as that project was done, the corporation would be dissolved. That was a corporation. If you're an originalist, that's the way you should think about a corporation. They're sure not people, and they don't have rights, and they should not be involved in influencing government elections. I guarantee you, if we're going to base our country on what the founding fathers would think, they would not support this decision at all. So again, originalism is just cherry picking for whatever decision you want.
Of course, but that's also what conservatism is at the end of the day anyway.
It's meaningless. It legally has no basis. The ruling also weakened both the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971, or FECA, sounds like fecal, it's fun, and the Presidential Election Fund Act by rejecting the anti-corruption justification used in the 1976 per curiam opinion in Buckley v. Vallejo, which upheld the constitutionality of those laws. The court upheld the contribution limitations in the FECA, see, it's fun, stating that they consulted one of the election law's primary weapons against the reality or appearance of improper influence stemming from the dependence of candidates on large campaign contributions, the other weapon being the disclosure requirements. Although it appeared that the contribution limitations did restrict a particular kind of political speech, the court concluded that they served the basic governmental interest in safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process without directly impinging upon the rights of individual citizens and candidates to engage in political debate and discussion. Another quote from that ruling, governmental interest in preventing corruption and the appearance of corruption, which justified the contribution limitations. So that was the justification used to limit speech, is to prevent corruption and the appearance of corruption within our elections. Well, a direct quote from the majority opinion in Citizens United.
Oh, no.
Independent expenditures, including those made by corporations, do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption.
How would it not? What is corruption then?
Yeah, bribery apparently is not corruption.
No, it's just doing business. What do you want? Holy crap. I think this is something that also should be really pointed out. Same thing with the Dobbs decision as well. There was a complete lack of awareness of what terms actually mean, or an intentional way of redefining these terms to make them almost meaningless in a legal statute. And that drives me absolutely insane. I know we just talked about that you can cherry pick what you want, and that's very, very true, especially when it comes to what terms mean.
Mm-hmm. And we're not done.
Oh.
Citizens United also obviously struck down the provision of the BCRA, the McCain-Feingold Act, that limited the amounts of money groups could spend, making it possible for a corporation or union to spend unlimited funds directly on independent ad campaigns that support or oppose a candidate. Previously, if those groups wanted to broadcast ads about a candidate, they had to sponsor a political action committee, or a PAC, that would then buy the ads, and the PAC could only accept limited amounts from each donor. Those limitations meant that in order to amass a large sum of money, PACs had to promote a political agenda that was widely acceptable to a number of donors.
Not anymore.
So obviously this overturned like 100 years of precedent for the same court that today talks about holding this precedent so sacred and history and all that. They completely disregarded that in this decision and overturned, what did we say, like 5 different rulings and laws in order order to...
Based on nonsense definitions and uses of old precedent, yeah.
And it went way beyond the scope of the case that was brought by Citizens United. Citizens United did not ask for a ruling on all of these different laws and previous rulings.
So it's like the Dobbs ruling.
It's
basically.
exactly like the Dobbs ruling, where they were not asking to overturn Roe v. Wade. They wanted to be able to limit abortions to 15 weeks. And the court just completely disregarded that and said, well, Roe v. Wade is unconstitutional. That's exactly what happened in this, except at a much wider scale. They completely destroyed any idea of campaign finance reform, any idea that corporations could be limited for political speech in any way, and basically opened it up for corporations to create super PACs, which brings us kind of to where we are now.
So let's talk about what happened since then. Actually, there's a very, very good report done by Open Secrets, which is a nonprofit group that looks at how campaigns have their expenditures, what they spend their money on, who's donating to these campaigns, the whole shebang. It's a fantastic resource if you want to see anywhere on trying to follow the money of where our political money actually goes. This report looks at a decade after the Citizens United decision. So it looked up all the way until I think it was like 2018 to like even like close to 2019 to 2020. A quote from the article, which I thought was fantastic, just encapsulates what we're talking about right now. In our 35 years of following the money, we've never seen a court decision transform the campaign finance system as drastically as Citizens United, said Sheila Kumroltz, executive director of the Center of Responsive Politics. In the last decade, the 10 most generous donors, and I mean that as in like the wealthiest people who are donating to campaigns, and their spouses donated $1.2 billion into federal elections. And that's where a lot of the interest comes from, where it's not necessarily corporate spending like a lot of people thought it was going to be. It's actually a gigantic amount in individual from wealthy people, as well as independent group spending. For independent groups, election raid spending from non-party independent groups rose to $4.5 billion in the last decade. For comparison, it totaled $750 million 2 decades prior. Now, Jason, I included a nice little graph for you to look at. I know this is an audio medium, but I recommend
It'll
anyone
be
else,
in the show notes.
Yeah, I recommend checking out this report in the show notes. You can clearly see how things like political parties, 501c4s or 6s, unions, whatever you can see, is pretty much stagnant from 2004 to 2018, while super PACs just shoot up in 2010 and then just gets even higher as the decade goes on.
Yeah, super PACs did not exist before, and now they're the highest spending group.
By a large amount.
Right. And everyone else has kind of stayed the same. 501s have gone up a little bit, which you'd imagine coming out of Citizens United. That's what Citizens United was.
Yeah.
But super PACs just explode and immediately, within 2 years, become the biggest contribution to campaign spending, and it's just skyrocketed since. And every 4 years, predictably, it shoots up even higher. And I'm sure if this doesn't go to 2020, but if it did, I'm sure it'd be off the top of this graph.
Sure. Well, and we'll get to that in a little bit as well. And this was also a very easy way to get around contribution limits. So we talked about contribution limits in just a little bit ago. Every state has their own different contribution limits, but the FEC actually requires all federal candidates to follow the same contribution limits, which is usually $2,900 per election cycle for any federal candidate from an individual. Now, technically, you can actually get up to, $5,800 because you can actually donate in the primary as well as the general election. But usually it's $2,900 per election cycle for that particular candidate per person. Now, you don't have to worry about that anymore, because if you actually want to donate more than that to a candidate, you give them that max donation that they are allowed to have by FEC rules, and then put the rest of your money into super PACs that will actually help that candidate for you. And you can give them as much as you actually would want. Which brings me to my next point, which is it also created the rise of single candidate super PACs. So there are super PACs out there that are based on ideology and issues and things like that. But nowadays, there is an extremely large amount of candidates that only support one particular candidate. And actually, it's usually started by the candidates themselves.
And that totally violates the one rule that's supposed to be left for these super PACs, which is they are not allowed to coordinate with with a candidate.
And we'll talk about that. In 2016, single candidate super PACs were responsible for an insane amount of $531 million of outside spending. It also gives the candidates the ability to fundraise for future elections before they actually announce the run. And that's where you were going to get to. So by FEC rules, a super PAC or a PAC cannot coordinate and has to be completely independent from a campaign. That does not mean that a candidate can actually work with a super PAC and fundraise lots of money, and then when they feel like they're ready to go, announce and file to run for office, and then have all the money they need to go and have the direction of what the super PAC wants them to do, or vice versa.
Which is why you saw a lot of people kind of egging from the left, egging Trump to declare to kind of get whatever protections he might get from his criminal cases, kind of cheekily knowing that it actually limit his fundraising through his PAC when he does finally declare.
And let's talk about Donald Trump, because I even have it in here. So weirdly enough, Donald Trump was one of the only candidates in the 2016 election that did not rely on a single candidate super PAC. It's because he mostly fundraised his own campaign. However, this time around,
Or the Saudis did.
This time around, Donald Trump's Save America PAC, which has been fundraising constantly since the election has been lost by him. And we saw, I think we talked about this during the FBI headline. It was a week or two ago where we're saying that the Save America PAC was immediately fundraising tons of money right after that,
Right.
saying like, they're out to get Donald Trump. Give us money now.
Millions of dollars.
Right.
Yeah.
So far in 2022, they have raised a whopping $103 million with very little of that money actually spent on anything.
Which is only legal because of this ruling,
Right.
Citizens United.
And
Otherwise, this would be illegal.
And technically speaking, this entire $103 million, just like in any other PAC, can be divvied out however they so choose. It doesn't matter what candidates they can give it to or who they can give it to. It doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is if Donald Trump runs for office and announces it, he can no longer work directly with this PAC. Even though right after he announces, they can immediately funnel all that money right into his campaign. Happens all the time. And because it happens, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And because it happens all the time, it actually leads to much more expensive races. If you guys don't know, the most expensive races were the last two Senate races in Georgia. I'm excluding presidential in this, by the way.
President, it costs around $1 billion to run
Right.
for president. Let that sink in. It costs about $1 billion to run for president of the United States.
Right. And a lot of that's done by PACs. But back to Georgia, Perdue, who was the Republican incumbent, and Ossoff's campaign spent over $244 million, more than any other senatorial or House campaign in history. Outside groups actually spent even more than that and also set a record, spending over $271 million just on that one seat. To make matters even worse, when we're already talking about unlimited funds that are making campaigns much more expensive, and you have possible coordination issues with campaigns and candidates and whatnot, we also have the issue of dark money. Dark money is usually referring to when independent groups are not required to disclose their donors that give to those super PACs, and then those super PACs can give to whoever they want. That means that you have tons of people who are trying to stay out of politics or trying to keep a very low profile can give thousands, if not millions of dollars to candidates without even being known who they are, at the legally speaking wise. After Citizens United, spending from dark money groups grew from $129 million to $963 million, almost $1 billion. This decision also opened lots of loopholes for foreign actors to secretly funnel money into elections because they can't get disclosed, even though they're not allowed to actually give to any political campaigns. They are allowed to donate and funnel money into any independent groups they so choose to. And those groups can then do whatever they want with those funds.
Like the Saudis and the Russians.
Like the Saudis and the Russians. Now, Jason, you have an article here.
Yeah, this is relatively new
It
news.
was very recent news.
It was going to be a headline until we decided on this topic, and then it fits so well into the topic.
So a new record has just been broken for the largest political donation in history by a single person.
A billionaire owner of a corporation. You may, if I certainly am very familiar with the company Triplight.
Oh, really? Is that who it was?
Yes. Working in IT, they make surge protectors and things for computers, and they have since the 90s. The owner of Triplite, who was a well-known Republican donor, Barry Said, has given 100% of his company Triplite to Leonard Leo, who is basically the guy behind fundraising for the Federalist Society. So they made a dark money group. He donated 100% of the shares as a privately owned company of Triplite to that group, which also means, by the way, no one's paying taxes on any of this money.
Nope.
And then that company was then sold to, I believe, an Irish corporation for $1.6 billion, giving Leonard Leo, who was already a major figure in conservative fundraising, known as the kingmaker in conservative politics, $1.6 billion to spend influencing elections and policy.
As he pleases.
And this was actually a couple years ago that this happened, but we just, again, dark money, we did not know. The nonprofit that they created was called the Marble Freedom Trust, and no one knew where the money that they had came from until people put together some different filings with the SEC and taxes. They kind of put the numbers together and realized that this came from Triplite. No one's commenting, but it's being reported by the New York Times that that's where, according to tax records that was provided to the New York Times, and someone with knowledge of the deal, they're the ones that put together, that's where this is coming from. So you want to know who paid for the Dobbs decision?
This dude.
the owner of Triplite. He's the one who bought the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And this money will continue. I think they have something like $900 million left.
Yeah, they spend very little of it so far.
Is still out there and will continue. It'll influence the next presidential election. It'll influence the midterms that we're going through right now. It is the largest political donation in history, and it's all due to the Citizens United ruling.
So when you hear dark money, this is what we're talking about.
We never would have known without all of those things coming together. No one would have ever known where this money came from.
So what does this mean for campaigns? Well, first and foremost, that means that the balance of political power shifted away from political parties into outside groups or PACs. If you don't know about politics from back in the day, political parties were actually the staple of how you would run your campaign for whatever you were running for. You had to get funding through your political party. You had to do all your organizing through your political party. The political parties were the kingmakers, literally.
Right. And so if you think about it, politicians used to have to answer to their parties and work with their parties. And certainly what we see, this sea change now, it's the most obvious under Donald Trump, who the party has to follow him.
Right.
Because he's the one that's raising the money with this super PAC.
Well, and that's where a lot of people, I remember we talked about before, where we were concerned with Marjorie Taylor Greene coming in and fundraising. And we were saying, well, she's just a crazy lunatic. How could she be doing so much damage? It's because of this. Money equals power in politics. Definitely, 100%. Especially because of how expensive elections and campaigns are. So when you have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Donald Trump, where they're not the mainstream Republican candidate, I mean, you can even use Bernie Sanders for that matter too, on the left. They will raise tons of money for you and for PACs that will help you. And that's where the real power comes into play. Because it doesn't matter where PACs are located, they can help whoever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want. And that's the new reality we live in thanks to Citizens United. Nearly every candidate today now takes PAC money. It is almost impossible to run a successful campaign without it. That is why you'll see a lot of like anti-PAC progressive candidates state that they don't take corporate PAC money as a way to distinguish the good PACs from the bad. You saw, actually, Mandel Barnes has been doing this a lot, where he'll say, I'm not taking super PAC money. Yes, he is. 100% he is. Joe Biden tried actually legitimately not taking PAC money until his fundraising all dried up. And I think within like 6 months of him starting his campaign, he switched his role.
Right after he started losing the primaries initially.
But even Obama did the exact same thing. It is nearly impossible to run a campaign today, especially at the federal level, without some kind of PAC or super PAC money, because that is what is now funding campaigns. Parties won't do a dang thing for you. They have limits. They have their own fundraising issues. They will do very little for campaigns. The money all comes from all these fundraising specialists in these PACs who will try to get fundraising from all around the country for you. Now, like we said before, it's supposed to be illegal for campaigns to coordinate with PACs, but we live in America and post Citizens United. So I want to talk about a couple examples of where you can see it's pretty blatant that they're actually just straight up coordinating right now and breaking the law. In Kentucky, Amy McGrath, the one who was running against Mitch McConnell, her campaign manager told the Lexington Herald, quote, "I think the signal is for people who are interested in contributing beyond the legal limits. They should have confidence to contribute to the super PAC," which was like the anti-Make Kentucky Great Again or Make America Mitchellist Again. I can't remember what it was.
Basically telling people to contribute to that PAC.
Which will contribute to her. Martha McSally in Arizona pleaded for PACs to help her while on the radio. Quote, "We need close air support to show up. There's outside groups. We can't talk to them. We can't invite them, but we pray for them every day."
We pray for them. That's such a thinly veiled appeal.
And I want to make it very clear, to date, the FEC has not found a single violation of a campaign coordinating with a PAC. They have not indicted anyone or charged anybody, so that's how bad things are. Along with fundraising, PACs are also able to help with research for campaigns. You may have heard things such as opposition research, where you're trying to dig up dirt on your opponent, you're trying to find research on yourself.
Oppo research.
Oppo research, it's the big term, right? Well, recently in the primary in Ohio Senate campaign, J.D. Vance was actually in a lot of trouble because he was supposedly coordinating with a super PAC that was pro-him, because the pro-Vance super PAC published a website with a 177-page Oppo research book on his primary opponents. And here's how they did it. From the article itself, and I'll add the political article for anyone who wants to read it. The site, housed on the publishing forum Medium, under the username @ProtectOhioValues Forums, allowed the super PAC to publicly convey information to the Vance campaign without breaking federal laws, prohibiting coordination between big spending outside groups and campaigns. By accessing the website, the lesser funded Vance campaign, because this is when they didn't have a lot of funding at the time, was able to capitalize on the resources of the Thiel funded, who's now basically the new Koch brothers, super PAC.
Yeah, Peter Thiel, he was, I believe, a Trump admin or worked for Trump briefly. He is a billionaire, extremely politically active, took down Gawker, right?
Yeah.
With the whole Hulk Hogan thing.
Yeah.
Scumbag.
So when it comes to research, you can still indirectly coordinate with each other. And the way that this PAC got around it was saying, well, we can put it out somewhere on the web, and if by chance the campaign happens to see it, there's nothing we can do about it. And that was the point. But what they would do, though, and Vance is just one example of this, is they would make a website that's available to the public. Anyone can access it. They would never have any regulations or passwords to protect the website access. But then they just don't tell anybody what the website is. Or they make it something super obscure, and then through a variety of like back channels, they will give it to the campaign that it just happens to find the website on its own. And then boom, there you go.
Bob's your uncle or your new president.
Sure. So there are tons of ways that campaigns are actually coordinating with PACs, breaking the law very blatantly, but it doesn't matter because our law is so insane to begin with.
Well, I mean, candidates are outright running PACs.
Right.
So there's nowhere else you can go than that.
Remember, this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. There are major, I think some of in that same Open Secrets report, I think out of the top 10, like the top 3 of those major PACs were Democrat-run PACs.
Right. Well, there's a reason why we ended up with Joe Biden as the nominee.
That's correct.
And Hillary before him. They're the ones that are favored by these more centrist because they're giant moneyed interests. Like, why don't we get more progressive candidates that want to take money out of politics and tax the rich? Because they own the elections. That's why. And this Citizens United ruling gave us that.
And the craziest thing in the world, Jason, going full circle of insanity, Citizens United made another documentary after the 2020 election titled Rigged about, and I'm not kidding,
You might kill us all with the irony with this next sentence.
multimillionaires secretly funneling money into elections.
Yep.
They rant about how Mark Zuckerberg is secretly influencing elections because he is spending endless dollars all around the country, and the lack of awareness.
Well, and they like we said, it's not just that they wanted this movie to be released and it just happened to end up this way. They purposefully designed a case to go to the Supreme Court and do exactly what it did.
Right, exactly. It's literally their fault that this happened, and they're still crazy enough to still be angry at millionaires funneling money into elections.
If they're on the Democrat side.
Right, exactly. And not even just the Democrat, it's just the pro-democracy side, for God's sakes. works because a lot of what they were complaining about was Zuckerberg helping out elections commissions during the pandemic.
So there you have it. That's why we're in a hellscape currently.
And that's why money buys elections. It really sucks, man.
We won't be recording next week, Labor Day weekend. I'm going to be out of town. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. And I'm going to go sit in the dark in a corner and cry.
Can I join you at least?
Sure, we can spoon. It'll be quite lovely.
I want to be a little spoon, though.
You have to be. I'm obviously Big Spoon. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively.
You do need to start screwing up more. Our outtakes have been very sparse the last couple weeks.
Basically, or what am I saying? Oh yeah, basically oh my God, what am I thinking here? Okay, yes, Jesus Christ. Up next, away from the bad news. Nope.